Welcome, everybody, to the Rad Friends podcast. It is the kickoff issue. I'm joined by my friend, Paul Millard. What's up, Paul?
How's it going, Kay?
Oh, man. It's fun to be on the other side. I was saying I got a little bit of butterflies, but it means I'm invested.
I am an original listener of Rad Awakenings podcast. And actually introduced me to some ideas in there that I think really changed the trajectory of my path and what I ended up working on. So, hey, I'm glad you're back in the game.
Awesome. So let me break it down for the listeners just the first time. So we're doing an 8-episode pilot. It's called Rad Friends. And every week I'll bring a different friend and we're going to hang. And we're going to do a little vibe check. We're going to talk about some things that excite us, that made us cringe over the course of the week. Then we're going to dive into a question. And there'll be one question per episode. I'll be like the anchor. And the thinking behind this was just, you and I and all the other Rad Friends, we have these conversations all the time. Meaning of life. What is work? What does it mean to be a good spouse? And it's just why other people would love to hear these. They'd be helpful. I would love to be a fly on the wall for others' conversations. So why not do it? Why not do it for ourselves? So thanks again, Paul, for kicking us off and walking me through all the settings before we recorded.
Yeah, so I wanna sell this podcast a little more before we dive in. Your newsletter, the Rad Reads newsletter, was transformative in my life, and I think a lot of people might look at what you're up to now and see all the stuff you're doing, and they may not fully understand like why you have so many supporters and followers. But basically for years, you showed up each week, shared interesting things you stumbled across, and then in the email, like you would just connect people like behind the scenes. And you did this for years, and you led to me hanging out with people in Vietnam, hanging out with people in Taiwan, led to consulting projects. And you did that for like dozens of people.
Man.
So I'm so pumped to see you like injecting that spirit back into what you're doing. And yeah, I guess people who are stumbling upon you in the recent years may not have experienced some of that.
Oh, man. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, there is, I think, and we'll talk about this, but I think that as I got down the road of, building an internet company and kind of, I think I lost a lot of, and we talked about this on your podcast, which we'll link to, I lost sight of a lot of the things that were me. And I was doing a lot of things because I thought I had to do them, right? And I think I'm in this season of life. I'm turning 44 this summer. I've been a creator for 8 years now, 400 issues of the newsletter, and I'm kind of like I'm going back to my roots. So I feel I'm feeling super excited about it. So why don't we? Okay, you're a new dad. I see on your Instagram we've met twice in person, I think.
Yeah.
You DJ for fun. You do CrossFit in Austin. So you're at I see these little DJ parties, and there's someone new that comes up to you, and you're like, hey, I'm Paul. And how do you describe to them like how you spend your time?
How I spend I don't know. This is the hardest thing. This is like something we should talk about, is that like how do you introduce yourself, right? I think the default script in the US is to say what you do for work, but I often ask the people what energizes you these days, and I think right now what energizes me is spending time with my daughter. The first 3 months of having a new child has been far greater, more fun, and interesting than I ever could have imagined. And that's been amazing. But yeah, I think I sort of structure my life around remaining energized and creative. So beyond that, the things I love doing are like writing, learning new things, and I've tried to build my life around enabling that to happen. So I do have ways I make money through like consulting skills training I run with companies and an online course around that. But I've never really tried to scale that up or build that into something big. It's always just been, how do I make that just generate enough such that I have the time to do the things that make me feel alive?
I love that. I love that. And that's the same here. Like I've been thinking a lot about aliveness. It's like, if this thing makes me more alive, do more of it. If it makes me more dead inside, do less of it. And we'll talk about, I mean, there's constraints to that, obviously, but you know, we can push on that. I think you're missing two things now. You're like the new guru of self-publishing, having released a book called The Pathless Path. So tell us the cliff notes of The Pathless Path, and we'll link to it. Everyone should absolutely read it.
Yeah, so I fell in love with writing in my first year of being self-employed. I had more space in my life, and I kept noticing that I wanted to write. I would open my laptop in the morning with coffee and be really excited to see what would emerge. And I decided that experience was so different than my past experience working in consulting that it was like, this is the spirit, the energy that I need to keep alive. So over the next few years, I really just wrote for fun. I talked to anyone that wanted to talk about work. I read everything. I think I discovered Andrew Taggart's work on your podcast and went down probably one of the deepest rabbit holes from a lot of his ideas, and really just kept asking this question of like, what does life look like if it's not designed around work? And what I mean by work is work in the sense of designing your life around a job and a lot of the default scripts about how you're supposed to live your life. Busy, focused on the next step, climbing a ladder, all these things. So writing was the thing I kept coming back to. And I just decided I would write most days, make sure that energy never died. And then in 2020, a crazy thing happened. The entire world got sent home to work remotely. And
crazy thing.
Suddenly everyone's like, my relationship with work is really weird. Who can I talk to about this? And wow. I was talking to 8 to 10 people every week. I had my Wednesdays open every week, wide open. Anyone could book a call with me. And I called them Curiosity Conversations. Before the pandemic, it was like 1 or 2 people. Because one of the things I think inspired by people like you is like, everyone's like, protect your time, charge for access to you. It's like, well, what if I did the opposite? What if I made it free to access me and I devoted an entire day every week to just talking to whoever is curious? And so I entered into this virtuous cycle of people telling me these things that they weren't sharing in public, more people telling me these things in 2020. And it was just this sort of like virtuous cycle of exploring ideas. And by the end of 2020, I had so many things I wanted to say that it was like, okay, it is time for a book. That became The Pathless Path. It actually wasn't hard for me to decide against traditional publishing. I didn't have a big enough audience to get anything close to an advance that would make a difference in my life. And I had bosses for 15 years and don't like bosses. So it was very clear I didn't want another one.
Yeah. Wow. Oh man, there's so much. Wait, so you started doing these curiosity calls. I love this, by the way. Paul Graham has this do things that don't scale, which, everything. Actually, this next episode is why are we so obsessed with growth? Like corporate growth, personal growth, money growth. But Paul Graham, who's a famous venture capitalist who blogs, we'll link to the post, has a post that says, do things that don't scale. And so it has been a personal mantra of mine. And you took it on another level by just like opening your calendar. I'm a little bit more protective than that. But if someone like sends me an email with questions, I'll respond with like a 5-minute Loom video. And that doesn't scale because you have to do it over and over and over. It's one of the most joyous things for me is to reply to strangers with like a 7-minute video. And so I love that spirit of like, yeah, that's the human side of shit. Like do things that don't scale because being a human is not a scalable activity per se.
Yeah, Seth Godin has this great quote about how the internet has lowered the marginal cost of generosity to 0. And people still have not realized this yet. We don't have the cultural scripts for how to actually engage in these new ways. I think people like you are sort of role modeling these changes. But we grew up in an era where if your friend had like an amazing art project or writing and you wanted to share it with somebody, think about this. You'd need to get in a car, buy postage, mail it to somebody. So like days of effort, time to drive to the post office. The marginal cost of generosity of sharing something with someone else was not actually zero. When it goes from like even $1 in a day to zero, it radically increases the scope of like what you can share. Like if anyone writes anything in the world that's interesting on work now and somebody sends it to me, I share it with them. We'll share it with people. Yeah. Like I have a bigger audience, and it's like that could change someone's life. So I have a really cool story of this. This guy, Chris Anderson, actually sent me a message today. He sent me the screenshot where this guy, Chris Anderson, responded to a tweet I did in 2020, June 2020. He said, Tamer, would love to hear you and Ali talk about this on Not Overthinking. And I'd known Tamer Abdal on Twitter for a while. He was a very curious person. He's like, yeah, this is great stuff. I've been meaning to do a deep dive into this topic for a long time. I said, happy to join the convo. He said, awesome. We'll definitely take you up on this. So in July of 2020, I am doing a podcast with Tamer and his brother. His brother was not on Twitter. I had no idea who his brother was. Turns out his brother is Ali Abdal. He has since become like a reader of my stuff. He was one of my early supporters, like really sharing my stuff. And yeah, he just recently did a video sharing my book, and it probably changed the trajectory of my book sales for like the next who knows how many years. And it's like that's just from sharing stuff and like other people saying, hey, check this out. This is cool. And people deciding to share my stuff.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And for those who don't know, Tamer's brother, Ali Abdal, is a massive, massive YouTuber who has bazillions of followers compared to both you and I. And he's a super down-to-earth guy. I'm actually seeing him in a few weeks. So I love that.
Yeah, he only had a couple 100,000 followers when we first connected. Now he has like 4 million. So I joke that he's my marketing intern.
And I think what people fail to realize is, you know, people like us who have followings like Ali, but even like bigger, they're just humans on the other side of the computer. And one thing, I write rad reads every week to 45,000 people now. If you reply with a thoughtful question, I'm going to respond. And many times I will send you my phone number to be like, how can I support you? I have one person, he's probably listening, where he wanted an accountability buddy to write and lift more. And I said, okay, do you think you could do those 2 things for 4 hours a week? And I'm going to text you on WhatsApp every Sunday morning. I set a reminder, and every Sunday morning I text him and I'm like, hey, how's it going? And from his perspective, he's not going to want to fuck up, you know? We've never met. And so I hope everyone listening to this knows that this happens way more than you think. Don't be shy to DM someone, LinkedIn, whatever. If you're thoughtful, if you're respectful, you're going to be surprised.
Yeah, and I think people don't realize, a lot of people on these weird paths are doing it because the world didn't care about their generosity and desire to help people on the previous paths. Mm-hmm. We talked about this on my podcast where both of us were basically spending our free time helping people. And we were told by managers that it's not going to help us getting promoted. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So part of the joy of life is like finding things you can do that don't have a monetary or economic upside. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and it's funny you say that. So I actually, on the first episode, not every episode is going to have a confession, but I actually have a confession for you about our interactions and our friendships, you know, over the years. And so maybe I'll set the context for the listeners. I think I'm a pretty generous person. I give, you know, a lot of my time and so on. Paul is on another level. But the other thing about Paul is that, and this will probably be in a subsequent episode, we'll probably talk about it today, is he doesn't give a fuck about the scripts at all. Like, you know, a very perfect example is he's been trying to convince me to write a book, and I'm still very attached to getting a traditional book deal. Like it's, you know, I went to Yale. It's kind of like another feather in my cap, and I care about the prestige, even though I wish I didn't care, which is another episode. Paul shits on marketing, direct copyright, you know, like all these things. And my confession to you, Paul, is that there was a stretch of time when I was watching you, and this was when I was really in the, like, I'm going to build an online business game. And in my head, and this wasn't with malice or spite, but in my head, I would say, like, I don't think Paul gets how this game's played. So I was kind of like scratching my head on your behalf and being like, one day he'll figure out that this is only to myself. One day he'll figure out that you got to learn how to do marketing, or you can't just leave all day Wednesday open, or you need a traditional book deal, whatever. And I say that because I want the listeners to think, because I call this like self-justification, where you see someone going against something that you believe in or that you're deeply invested in. The perfect example of self-justification is when I see someone on Wall Street and they've made tons more money than me. The first thought that comes to my mind is, well, they don't see their kids a lot. So it's me justifying to myself why it's okay for me to not choose that other person's decisions. It's kind of like a weird self-soothing, self-affirming way. And I really want people to think about myself too, because when you go out towards someone else, it reveals something about yourself. And so what did it reveal? The fact that I was like, he doesn't get it. And I think what it reveals about myself in that moment was a discomfort with the path that I was going on. And again, that was a very aggressive, like, I'm going to be a Ramit Sethi like influencer, right? And I need to do all these things to do that. I need to win, you know, and to call a spade, I had swapped one game, like the game of Wall Street, for another game, the game of like internet clout. And here was someone, Paul, that's like, fuck internet clout. What a shitty way to live your life. And in my mind, I'm like, I want to believe you, but I can't. And so I will kind of criticize you in my head for doing the thing that I don't have the courage to do. So I want to lay out, I was going to confess this to you one day, but I was like, what better place than to do it on a podcast?
But that's not surprising. I think I go through this too in the opposite direction, right? Where it's like, oh, this, I see it more with people early on their path where it's like, oh, this is an obvious trap. And I think the way I think about this is that I really am trying to find my path that fits with my psychologies, my fears, my insecurities. I didn't know how to be happy and playing that game you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right? Every time I leaned more into learning marketing, I felt miserable, right?
I did too.
So, but the trap, I think, on our paths is being against something, right? And in the first few years of my path, I think there was a immature sense of, I don't want to create this former path of resenting my job and being against the corporate path, right? Yeah, and I did hide. I think I was not ambitious enough. I was scared to create anything that felt like a job with me. But in those moments, I also found something like my connection with writing, my ability. Like, I realized my superpower was like, I'm just not going to quit. So it doesn't matter how fast I go. All I need to do is break even with money. And I was playing a different game than other people. Yeah. And if you read somebody's like Twitter feed too, it's also not the best. Like, that's why I tried to that's why I try to go like, okay, Twitter is like the thought bombs. And then like my newsletter is going to be deeper. And then my book is the deep, raw reflection.
Yeah.
And I share all my insecurities and going through a lot of these things in my process to show you that like this is my raw personal journey. I still don't really know if I have the right answers. And I'm trying to figure out what's next. But I have to be... The only way I can thrive on my path is if I'm for finding out the path that makes sense for me and not against somebody else's path.
Yeah. No, I think, and it was funny because Calvin Rosser, I might be mispronouncing his last name. If you're listening, Calvin, what's up?
Yeah, I saw him last week.
Yeah, he said, I've surfed with him. Again, it's just these internet worlds. He said, please don't get on the podcast and just shit on work. Right. And that's definitely not what we're going to do when we kick off our big question. But I think that it's interesting because that like self-justification story, I even see it with a friend of mine. He's late in the game. He started his kind of consulting career much later, and now he's really, really reaping the rewards. Like multiple houses. Like he just like wakes up and decides like, I want to buy a boat, and just like goes to buy a boat. Like I get happy now when I get like a $500 check. I'm like, yes, I'm awesome. And in my mind, he's one of really close friend of mine. And in my mind, I'm like, yeah, but he doesn't. I'm like, I wonder, why do you think we do that when we see someone who's getting something that I don't want a boat, but I still need to justify to myself my own behavior for not wanting the boat.
Yeah, so for me, this is why it's easier for me to be on my path. I actually just have less desires than most people I've found.
No.
I don't desire any of that stuff. Like ownership of my time and like creative freedom is so valuable to people. It's like my like $1 million house in a nice neighborhood that like I have it already. It's just I can't make that visible to other people, and people can't experience how that feels to me. Yeah, like I'm actually so happy because I have my big house. It's just invisible to other people. Yeah. Right? And the thing is, like, it's the process to get there too, right? It's, I know like my hypothesis is I couldn't go work full time again in the past. I was in the past and still be the parent I want to be and still like actually do it and stay energized. I could be wrong, but I just don't know if I can do that, which makes me super desperate to figure it out on my own. Right. And I am pragmatic sometimes about like, okay, I do need to figure out some marketing, but like, I don't need to go all the way. And it's really hard. And work is really hard to talk about because what I've found is work is really deep. Work is people's moral judgments of the world, their views about what being a good person is like, their views about being useful, their views about mattering in a long-term legacy sense. And it's like, that's why it's so interesting to talk about too, because this stuff is deep.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to pause you there because I don't want to get to our question yet, but you said one of the things that I'm paraphrasing is unique about me is I don't desire many things. And there's like so many, you go to the Stoics is like, true wealth is not desiring things, or true wealth is figuring out what's enough. When you say that, immediately I go to one of the noble truths of Buddhism is desire is suffering.
Yeah.
Right. Have you always not desired things?
Yeah. I mean, this is just me. I never really desired much, so it's easier for me. I don't know
how are
how
you
to
raised?
Pretty simple. Like neither of my parents went to college. My dad worked in manufacturing from when he was 19. My mom didn't start working part-time until I was in like high school, I think. Loving parents, lots of family around, simple life. Like we didn't have much money when I was little.
In the States?
My dad worked a lot, did like overtime and weekend shifts. But like we had a simple life. We had enough and like spent bountiful times of like fun with family. And like family really is important to me. I'm trying to build that now with my wife and daughter. And yeah, I think the hard thing is for a lot of people, they have an idea or story about how life is supposed to go. For some reason, I've never really had that. Like even in my career, like I didn't have, like other people were like, oh, I want to be like a partner one day. And I was making like 125 grand after business school. And I was like, I feel like I have more money than I could ever need. You guys are all crazy.
Yeah. It's I was seeing someone tweeted the other day, like there are people in New York City making 7 figures living paycheck to paycheck, which is completely true, which is it's absurd that it's true, and it's absurd that I know many of those people. I was not one of those people, which is why I'm able to live this way. It's funny, I'll juxtapose. Where did you grow up? Like what city?
Eastern Connecticut.
Connecticut.
Yeah, basically the woods, like 40 minutes east of Hartford. I went to New York once before I turned 18, for reference.
Wow. So it's not like living in Stamford. or
No. I remember going to Yukon and meeting all these people from Fairfield County, the richer part of Connecticut. I was like, whoa, these people had a completely different, like they were wearing like Ralph Lauren and like I had never seen this stuff before. It was crazy.
Yeah. Oh man. So I wanted to share a story about my relationship with desire. So growing up, similar-ish, parents are immigrants. Dad worked at the United Nations. I think when I was born, we were probably lower middle class, just from like not having any savings, and then my parents work hard, very, very frugal. By the time middle class, what is? People were like $700,000 is middle class in New York, like so salary. So I don't even know how do you even measure it anymore. But a big part for me was I wanted things when I was a kid, and like I wanted Nintendos and I wanted He-Man, action collectibles, comic books, all this stuff, and unless it was in service of my education, the answer was always like no, or you gotta wait, a year or 2 years or whatnot. And so from that point, I remember I've always been a very entrepreneurial person. As a kid, I said, no one's ever gonna tell me what I can't or can't have. And that really became a driving force from probably age 8, probably like around, I actually see my daughter who's 9. She gets a lot more than we got growing up, but I see her building the trade. It's like, hey, what do I have to do to get this? What do I have to do to get a new Nintendo Switch game? What do I have to do to do? I was very much like that. And that kind of like really stayed with me for a long, I think desire got molded. There was a desire for physical stuff, and that kind of like evolves into the desire for status and for power and all the kind of non-physical things. And now it's definitely time. Like for me, it's like time and creative autonomy. So we both landed at the same place. But I definitely have had and I still get like pangs. I'll tell you another story. A friend of mine is extremely successful. There's one thing I would buy if Rad Reads blew up, like profitability wise. It would be a Porsche Taycan. I don't even know how to pronounce it well, but it's the Porsche electric car. It's like $100,000.
I don't get cars.
I don't like cars either.
Even Porsche. Somebody brought me to a Porsche dealership, and he was like, "Aren't they so cool?" I'm like, "Dude, I don't feel anything."
Yeah, I know. And so for me, that's the one. It's like in terms, there's nothing I want to buy stuff wise. Like like I have everything I want stuff wise. Like if any, it's just like more computer gear, like that's like a better mic or something. But there's some fantasy of mine where I get this Porsche Taycan. Again, I don't even know if I'm fucking pronouncing it right. That's how little I know about it. But it's super sleek. And I do love design. And like it looks like a piece of craft. That's what excites me. So this friend of mine, unbeknownst to me, says to me, he's like, hey, I bought a Porsche Taycan. This is so fun. I bet I'm pronouncing it wrong, which would just make the whole thing, this whole story
I'm
sound
looking
funny.
at it. 85 grand. You could buy one of these now. Why don't you just rent one for a month?
I know. Well, it's EV charge. It's interesting you're calling me out on it. It's like I'm falling in love with love. It's like I love the idea more than actually owning it. Because you say, why don't you buy one now? I'm like, I can't. I don't have the cording.
No, just rent one for a month.
Wired for. So that's a good idea. Again, even you're pushing me on it. It's like already losing its appeal. Well, okay, so this friend. Oh yeah, go.
But this is the thing. Like a lot of what I do is I'm not sure what the ideal way to live my life is. I just test stuff. And me and my wife are always like, what if we test this for a month and then we can either scale up, exit, or change our plan?
I love that. So yeah, back to this friend. He buys the thing and he's like, similar upbringing and he doesn't like it. He doesn't like taking care of it. So this is a common thing. Like when you really nice stuff owns you. This is why I don't want to own a house. It's like when your stuff starts owning you, you've gotten to a bad place. That's one. The second, also something I would feel very relatable, is he feels like a douche rolling up to a soccer game in a fucking Porsche. Yeah. Even though he lives in a very wealthy neighborhood where there's a lot of Porsches, but they're probably not at the soccer game. So there's already this this limits as to where it's in his mind, where it's okay to drive the car. And then there's a guilt. This is the crazy part, that like he is being irresponsible. I mean, this is a hedge fund man. It does not move the needle in his personal financial calculus. And so then he said at the end, he said, knowing what I know, I would be much happier if I had just gotten a Chevy Tahoe. And it's crazy. And it was like, it's like the one thing, this thing I'm holding out in my head, like, oh, it would be so cool to have one of these.
But that's the thing that's so rare, is people actually being honest with themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And actually owning your desires. I think we short circuit ourselves when we think we don't have desires. Right? And I think I did this Tim Urban want box bucket. It's in his career essay. Okay. And you rank your desires.
Is that the octopus?
Yes.
The career octopus?
So yeah, he has the want box exercise. Okay. And it made me, one of the things I realized, the freedom was like, it just crushes. Freedom always goes to the top for me. But another thing was, I realized is like, I needed appreciation.
Ooh.
And I think this comes back to love. Like Adam Smith has, we want to be loved and to be lovely. Right. And what he's saying is we want to be lovely for the things we actually care about. Yeah. Right. We want to glow doing the things we care about, and we want others to recognize that. And I think a big challenge for me on my former career path is I didn't feel like anyone appreciated me.
Wow.
The people that were appreciated worked more than everyone else and grinded and made the most money and played status games. And I just wanted to like help people. And I think writing for me has like solved some of my status needs, in that I can actually get status by sharing my journey, thinking deeply about ideas, and proactively helping people. Right. So we do need status, but I rather get status from someone like you than the partner I used to work with at my consulting firm.
Got it. That's so interesting. One thing I've been wondering about you on this is what's so fun about this is that we have like all these thoughts that are like, oh, let's just talk about it, and then let's let everyone else listen. And so I think this status and prestige, it's interesting to hear, because I look at you sometimes and I'm like, is this guy the fucking Buddha that like he doesn't have any desires, he doesn't give a fuck about prestige? I'm like, does he have a soul? You know, like, is he human? Maybe you're just a generative Midjourney AI, but I know you have like this huge heart. I noticed an exchange between, or like little bits of an exchange. So I just framed this for the listeners. So,
Yeah.
So you can think of Paul as the very kind of anti-prestige guy. Like he'll be like, why would you go to, you know, like these big companies, big names, this Porsche? Like I don't care about any of that stuff. I might be paraphrasing.
I don't,
probably.
but I'm telling you should do it. Like I think this is where Ramit Sethi is great.
Yeah,
he's like actually 10x your interest, right?
Yeah. But so the question I want to ask you is, we have a common friend, Simo, who wrote a book called The Good Enough Job. And he went down the very traditional path. And he is like, he's crushing it in the visibility. Like he's on Squawk Box, New York Times, Atlantic. I mean, it's like the royal flush of media
he's
appearances.
Killing it.
He's killing it. Do you when you see that, do you feel anything?
Yeah, I feel like a loser and a failure.
You serious?
Yeah.
Say more.
It's like, wow, there are all these things I could have done, all these people noticing these ideas that I've been talking about for years, and nobody paid attention to me. But then what I do is like I come back to like, what is the game I'm playing? Yeah. What is the game I can actually win? Yeah. Now, I've gotten to know Simo. I can't actually play and win his game. Why has he been successful doing that? Because he actually built and cultivated those relationships over the years, being a thoughtful person, being a generous person, and he's in the journalist world.
And being a journalist. That's an important thing that not everyone might know.
Right. So if he self-published, he'd still be getting that press.
Yeah.
However, also, like, the traditional publishing game is all about the launch, right? And you know about launch energy.
Marketing, it's a marketing blitzkrieg. So
I come back and say, okay, you can't actually play that game and be the person you want to be. I don't have launch energy. I have long game energy. I'm not going to quit. I'm going to keep writing about work for 20 years.
Yeah. That's a beautiful...
And it's also awesome. Like, his book is great. Like, I just wish traditional publishers let people share more of their personal journey. Yeah, it's more of like other people's stories. Simo's story is so cool.
I know.
I did have his book here.
And and for the listeners, like, I think we'll link to it. Definitely go get Simo's book. It's fucking awesome. For those of you like listening that aren't familiar with the language, so launch energy, you can think of launch energy as like 100-meter dash. It's like you have to take, and it's for books, it's for TV shows, it's for anything that has like all the energy needs to converge around a point in time to really push the thing forward, like a movie release, things like that. And launch energy, or just launching anything on the internet, is like, I tell people, when we used to launch our core SYP, we had a 60-page Google Doc of marketing copy. 60. That is the launch energy. You build it all up, and then the day you hit go, you release it. And I would be like comatose after for like 2 months because it's that exhausting. And contrast that with like being like you're like even beyond a marathon. You're like an ultra marathon, like 50 miler or something. It's just like, no, I'm just going to put one foot in front of the other for 50 miles, and then this other stuff's going to happen. Is that a fair distinction?
Yeah, so it's knowing what game I can play over the long term. I don't want to go back and get a job. And so it's all about sustaining my energy and interest in my path. And like the desires, I test these things. So Billy Brose is somebody that taught you a lot of this marketing stuff. He had like a cohort-based course teaching people how to do this, and they invited me to do it. I got really excited about, I could like 5X my consulting skills course. The path is still there. I've just never leaned into it. So I said, all right, I'm not going to join the cohort. I'm going to spend one day looking at all of Billy's landing pages and like integrating his best practices, watching a bunch of his content. So I spent 8 hours doing this one day, and I was like, I hate this shit. I literally coming out of that, I did my annual reflection and decided to write a book in 2021.
Yeah. Which is so funny because I suspected that I hated it, but I was making good money doing it.
Yeah.
And so that's where my confession comes in. I told myself, hey, you like doing this, where deep inside I didn't. And it all came full circle when I just like blew everything up from my own business perspective, and like, fuck marketing, fuck launches. Like, I want to go back to just like being a creative person. And so yeah, it's just funny how it comes full circle. But I think you're right. Like, so much of it is about like, do you know yourself, right? And like, even you pushing me on the Porsche, like, I'm already getting a little tense. And it's almost like I'm thinking, as you're like, go rent it, I'm like, oh, my driveway actually is slanted. I don't know if I can clear the low clearance of the car without scratching the bottom. And I'm already this waterfall of floodgates of excuses is coming out. And I'm like, yo, if that's the only big ticket purchase that I have left in me at this point in my life, and like I'm already feeling nervous about it, it's like, yo, you're good, man.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I mean, this is what living abroad helped me loosen the American script that like you should always want more. I think being here, it's hard to avoid that. Yeah. We both have friends who are crushing it in the US. Yeah. And they have more than us. And I think sometimes it varies. Sometimes I'm like, ooh, do I want a house in Austin? These houses are nice. Angie goes through the same thing too, but I'm so lucky to have a partner that can have thoughtful, deep conversations about this stuff, and we sort of just keep opting into our life.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the partner thing it cannot be overstated to like there's so many people in New York where it's usually the guy that works, and then he'll turn to someone like me, or he's like, hey, I want to do this, but my partner is not okay with it. Like, I don't know if that's true or not, but I will say that having a partner when I said, hey, I think I'm going to quit, she's like, cool. She just had two stipulations. We're not eating ramen, and I don't want you to like stress about buying generics at the pharmacy. If you can promise me those two things, I trust that as a unit, we'll be able to figure it out.
Nice. Hopefully you didn't give up good ramen.
No, she was like, it was the startup trope.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into. Oh, you were gonna say something.
Yeah, I just think having the right partner is so important, and I'm so lucky I didn't get married until I finally started to figure out myself.
Definitely. All right, so let's jump into our main event. We were nice and warmed up. And we've already been alluding to the question, but let's like actually state it. Oh, and by the way, we're gonna jump into a question, and we actually do this at Rad Reads. We have these group coaching cohorts. They're small. There's no marketing. There's no launch. But if you go to radreads.co/coaching, you can sign up for the waiting list for one of these cohorts where we get a group together and ask these questions, ask and ponder them. So today's question is, why does work dominate our lives? So I got one of the expert here, Calvin. We're not going to shit on corporate America.
No, I think if people really engage with my writing, they find a deep appreciation for work and an awareness of my own naivete. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if I say that word right. Naiveness.
I think you said it right. No, naivete.
But I loved the corporate world early on my path. I felt so lucky that I got to work at a place like McKinsey. I was surrounded by people that cared about me, challenged me. I became a lot better. I got in an environment that pushed me beyond what I thought was capable of. And it opened up so many paths for me in life. Over time, the learning turned into learning how to play politics and climb the ladder. And my intrinsic motivation evaporated, right? And I noticed that I was just going through the motions of my life. And when I quit my job, I just wanted to run away from work. My association with work was that something that might like ruin your life. Turned me into like an overweight, cynical old man, which was my biggest fear. And what I discovered over the past 6 years is that you can find work that matters to you. You can develop a relationship with it that is sustainable. And when you find that, your view on the world might change, and that you might be willing to give up everything to keep that energy and spark alive. And that's a lot of what I write about. But a lot of this was triggered by something I discovered on one of your early podcasts with Andrew Taggart.
Oh, go for it.
He wrote this article, a different version of your question. If work dominated your every moment, would life be worth living? In Aeon. It was written in December 2017.
Yeah.
And I'll just read from it. I have the article up.
Yeah.
Let's see. Imagine that work had taken over the world. It would be the center around which the rest of life turned. Then all else would come to be subservient to work. And then he goes on, he calls this total work, right? And how in this world of total work would people think and sound and act? Everywhere they looked, they would see the pre-employed, employed, post-employed, underemployed, and unemployed. And there would be no one uncounted in this census. Everywhere they would laud and love work, wishing each other the very best for a productive day, opening their eyes to tasks and closing them only to sleep. Everywhere an ethos of hard work would be championed as the means by which success is to be achieved, laziness being deemed the gravest sin. And this article rocked me. It made me just question everything I was building my life around, and sort of gave me a pathway out of my anger at my previous path. And it showed me that, well, perhaps I had designed my life around work, right? My friends were just people I worked with or working in similar jobs or available outside of the hours I worked. Where I lived was based on my income and how much I made. What I did socially was based on my income and the kind of work I did. And it was like, wow, this really is the fabric of reality. In the US, people ask, what do you do?
Yeah.
And so I sort of just started asking the question of like, what if I designed a life not centered around work? Right? And I sort of buy Andrew's argument that life is dominated by work. And this makes it unable to see things that are valuable in life.
Yeah.
Right? The natural impulse is to like, don't just help. Like you said, for free. You had your calendar open and you're talking to people for free. That implies that the default is for pay.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Right? So I just started questioning these things, and I think I experienced for the first time over that next year leisure, like deep leisure, like a state of contemplative awareness and an action orientation. So you're for things. You're drawn toward writing. You're drawn toward helping people. You're drawn toward doing all these things. I literally didn't experience that in my adulthood. And it was so shocking for me. And that's what made me go deeper on my path. And that was the awakening that led me to commit to this long game. If you look at my income in the first 3 years of my path, after self-employment taxes, it was 32 grand, 28 grand, and then 20 grand.
And this is before you had a kid?
Yeah. but I knew I wanted to have kids. And I thought the most important thing to do with my time was to actually figure out what I wanted out of my life. And I spent 10, 15 years working in internships and jobs in grad school, and I didn't learn anything about myself.
About yourself.
And it was really terrifying that I had other people thought I was successful, but I started to realize I am just starting my life.
Yeah. Wow. So when you look at that total, the question that Andrew posed, and I remember I think I worked, for those of you who don't know, Andrew is a friend. He's a practical philosopher. And so I philosophized with him on a personal, it's like a strange mix of life coaching, spirituality, training, and therapy, kind of all packed into one very bizarre offering and beautiful. But I remember with the total work argument, it's people go on vacation to be more energized for work. People, all the sleep hacks, it's to have more energy. It's not because sleep is good for you. It's because you can be more productive at work. People meditate, like Ray Dalio, and look, that's how I got into meditation, was through the lens of performance. And so what in your research or paraphrasing Andrew's argument is, how did we get to this point?
Yeah, I mean, that's the puzzle, right? And I think this is the other side of work. It is the greatest time to be alive. And the jobs normal people can work that enable them to live prosperous and good lives are so abundant. Literally billions of people can work in jobs where they only have to work 40 hours a week and they can live a good life. Billions of people. It's an incredible time to be alive. And we produce through this industrial march of the 20th century these full-time jobs, right? However, people started to see that as the only way to live your life, right? And we lost touch with things like a deeper connected leisure state. Not leisure sitting and watching Netflix, or not leisure on a 1-week busy vacation disconnected from work to get back to work, but a slow state where you're really feeling connected to yourself and the world. And we started to lose wisdom around that. We had multiple generations where people started to think the whole point of life was to get a job, right? And it's very tricky to talk about because people get so triggered because they do think work is the center of life, and they do think making money is the most important thing. And those things are valuable. Yeah. But that's how people think because everyone else thinks that way. Yeah.
I mean, there. We don't have to beat it down, but there's the traditional the Protestant work ethic where you were rewarded and I'm not a religious person, so I'm going to be paraphrasing this, but you proved yourself worthy of heaven or of God by your actions, right? So inaction meant something bad, and action meant something good. That's one theory. One thing that I think about often, and we've alluded to this in different parts of the conversation, is the question of identity. And it actually, I think about this often through the lens of my wife. Because Lisa is an artist, and even that kind of fits a little bit outside of the realm of work, but of traditional definitions of work. Sorry.
Yeah.
Then, when our kids were born, she stopped working. She stopped creating art, and it's I know that there's all different marital arrangements, components, people listening to this. But some are the people who stopped working, some are the people who kept working, some of the people who resent working and had to keep working. But the thing that I observed was it created this identity vacuum, right? And I think on your podcast, I called it the identity quake. And the identity vacuum, I've been thinking a lot about this question. And I think it's twofold. It's the identity, the external identity. And so, a group of people go to a dinner party and in America, one of the first 3 questions is going to be, what do you do for work? And if you are staying at home with your kids, you're like, oh, I'm a stay-at-home parent. And there is some kind, whether it's real or not, some people feel a stigma to that, which is like, I'm not living my full potential of talent, of skill, of intellect, of the degrees that I got leading up to this point. That's one. Yeah. That's the external
especially
one. But then
in
there's
the
also
US.
Especially in the US. And then there's the internal one, which is how I see myself. And I think this is the one, again, maybe we could just use it on gender lines, because oftentimes the primary breadwinner is, although that's changing, but at least for me, the how I see myself is a really powerful, like, I care a lot in my own eyes. I care to see myself as smart. I care to see myself as unique. I hate to admit it. I care to see myself as someone who is good. And but so many of those things I just described, smart, respected, creative, so many of those things are bequeathed upon you by work, or at least at the surface level, right? You could be really smart, but if you don't have a job, you might not feel that you're smart because there's no conduit to express your intellect. Does that like, how do you think of that identity puzzle?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think the other upside of work is it is a really easy way to find a role in the world, right? And societies, a lot of what we're seeking is to be useful. We want to contribute. Yeah, most people don't actually want like impact. We want to contribute and be useful, and that is channeled into work, and that makes us legible to other people. And people can say, despite somebody working at Wells Fargo who defrauds customers every week, oh, that person's useful. They have a middle manager job. They're making good money. They're taking care of their family, right? Jobs serve that function, right? And a lot of what I write about is like, there's a step beyond that. If you want to, if that's not working for you, right? I think for me, I didn't actually like all the labels and identities that were thrust upon me. I wanted to like create my own identity, right? I want an identity that's like, oh, he does thoughtful long games. He's like playing a long game. It's weird. It's not really clear what he's doing, but he really cares about like work and helping people on unconventional paths. And that's aligned for me. That feels good. Yeah. But yeah, this stuff is so hard. Yeah. Like in the US, like Angie was actually listening to a podcast a couple weeks ago with a lot of Americans talking about the struggle of like not feeling valuable as like a stay-at-home mom. And she's like, I don't resonate with these women at all. I've never felt more valuable. And I'm so glad she can experience that, because she does have so much to offer. And like the mother role is so much more important than like any job. Yeah. And so it's just so beautiful to watch. And I mean, another thing we talk about a lot is like, I do make a majority of the income in our setup. She's still trying to find her path. She's not from this country. Actually working in English is very challenging and something she's had to like figure out. She's still trying to figure out what her path is and her relationship to work. But one thing we say is like, so in my book, I talk about the real work of our lives. And the real work is the stuff we're drawn to, the stuff we're connected to. For me, it was writing. So Angie knows if I'm losing my energy with writing, like something's going wrong, she needs to support me. Yeah. For her, it's like art and movement. If that's disappearing, it's like, okay, something's wrong. I need to support Angie, make sure she gets her spark back. Writing for me didn't make money until this past year. She hasn't really figured out how to make money with writing and art, but now we're not doing like daycare or anything. We're just taking care of our daughter indefinitely. She started feeling better and she's leaning into those things. So like we're talking about like, she's like, I feel like I shouldn't be doing these things to have you watch the daughter because you make more money than me. And it's like, No, I do not want to build a family around that. I want to elevate the real work, the stuff that matters to us. Your art is equal to my writing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's actually doesn't matter. Like we'll figure out the money. Like we have more runway now because I have made more money in the past couple of years. And it's like, if we can indefinitely always push out the like have to grind on paid work to do the real work that is like enriching to our soul, like that's what we're fighting for. That's why we're building a family around this ethic. So yeah, we're very clear around like it is worth it for her to work on stuff that doesn't make money.
Yeah.
Over my work that might make money.
You know, one thing that you have mentioned, which I think we should honor that we take it for granted, you, myself, your wife, is like finding that thing. Right?
Yeah, it's very hard to find.
It's very hard. So I know.
It took me until 34.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I'm 44 and I'm like still figuring it out. And I think that's like I do when I coach, I coach mostly executives, mostly in the financial services industry. I have them do this exercise where I ask them to imagine that they have a rich benefactor and that covers all of their living expenses. And then in Excel, I ask them to map out an average
Excel,
week.
I love it.
So it's like I'll sleep for 9 hours, I'll exercise for 2, and then so they'll do like 8 hours of sleep, 3 hours of family, 1 hour of reading, 1 hour of self-care, and basically however they do it, they always have like 10 hours left to allocate.
Yeah.
And in this hypothetical world, there's like no real concept of a weekend, right? So it's like, what are you gonna do with 70 hours of your time? By the way, your friends, you rely on your friends. You can't even rely on your kids in that regard because they all have their own constraints. And people just, they don't know, right? And like they'll throw things a little bit like the Porsche thing. They'll be like, oh, I want to be a photographer. I want to learn photography. I want to learn how to cook. Those are the two most common ones, photography and learning how to cook.
I've done both of those. They're very fun to learn.
But these are, 45, 50-year-old men with millions and millions of dollars in their bank account. And they actually do control their time more than they, at this point they have teams and all that. They're waiting to take that cooking class till they're 60, right? And I think it goes back to the Porsche. It goes back to falling in love with the idea of love. I actually think that in many cases, if they took the cooking class, they actually would hate it. And they realize that they just like the placeholder of it.
Yeah. We do this, right? We basically take stories of what we think we should want, right? The real challenge is actually getting in touch with your own desires again, right?
Yeah.
It actually took me like 3-4 years on my path to really get in touch with this more playful, learning things, excited kid mindset. Yeah. And last year was when I started like learning how to DJ. I learned how to yo-yo. I learned how to cook. I did all these things, but like it took me a while to actually get there. Yeah. And with that original question from Andrew early on, it was like, I need to lean into this space. If I read throughout history, everyone says that if you go into this contemplative state, you disconnect, you start waking up, you start reconnecting with yourself. And what I've seen over and over again is if people do non-work experiments, they start getting more in touch with themselves, which is why I always tell people, take a 3-month sabbatical. It will probably change your life. And in that space, you'll figure out what to do next.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't try to aim at the things right now.
Yeah.
Just create space and then see what emerges. And
kind of like
I've
renting
always been
the Porsche, you told me.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been super comfortable with, like, I don't need to know what I'm doing next. I've never really cared. And so I just have like a tinkerer mindset. I just try stuff.
Yeah, yeah. People always ask me, they're like, did you know you were going to start Rad Reads when you left BlackRock?
No,
and
you just tried
the
stuff.
answer is hell no. And the thing is, and actually, the question I was about to ask you, and then I'll answer, and then I'll get is, okay, so a lot of people are going to be listening to this, and they have a demanding job. They have 2 kids. You know, they work 8, 9, 10 hours. They get home, put their kids to bed, maybe watch, an episode of, I don't know, Succession or whatever, and then like rinse, repeat. You actually posted that TikTok about that.
Yeah.
And so the question is first of all, I think we both agree that that person shouldn't just, fuck off and quit their job tomorrow. I think that would be the worst outcome. And I'll share what I did, and then I'll ask the question. So people always ask me, like, how did you land on Rad Reads? And so while I was at BlackRock, and I was working like 12 to 14 hours a day, I was tinkering all the time. I would wake up at 5 in the morning before I had kids and come up. I had a business plan. It was called, I remember it was called like Fleet, I think, or something to do with like a pack of birds, flock. And it was Uber for headhunters. So basically, like, if you could go to a headhunter and be like, oh, they're looking for like a CTO, and you knew a CTO, you could go tell the headhunter that you had a CTO friend, and you would like get a portion of the commission. And so I wrote up a business plan for Flock, it was called. And I'm like, this doesn't sound like a good idea. But I was constantly doing these. I started an anonymous culture blog about New York City art, food, and museums. I was tweeting anonymously for 5 years under Building 20. Some of the listeners might remember. And so for me, quitting, I didn't do the sabbatical route, and in part because I had a pretty big financial safety net. But I said, if I could do this tinkering for an hour a day for years, 2 to 3 years, imagine what would happen if I could do that for 10 hours a day. That was the bet I made on myself.
Yeah, so this is so common in everyone's paths, I find, is that there's these initial clues. If you look back, it's so obvious. But in the moment, it's really just this like energy that's demanding to be released, that is not finding an outlet in other aspects of life. So if that has been extinguished in your life, step one is just to see, how can I get back in touch with that? So I actually have very simple advice for people. One is go take a walk without a destination and without your phone for 2 hours. Wander. Just go to an intersection and then see what your gut is telling you about turning next. Most people don't really spend any time in their lives in the modern world wandering without a destination. See how it makes you feel. The other thing is, during a work day, block out 2 to 3 hours, pretend you're going to the doctor or something, and then do something you loved as a child. For me, I do this on certain days. I do yo-yo, I'll play basketball, just wander, ride a bike, do things I loved as a child. And you'll start to like, oh, I used to have a lot of fun playing basketball. This is nice. And just keep following that, right?
Yeah.
A sabbatical is probably the boldest but still safe option to do this.
Yeah.
And is more possible than ever before in most workplaces, because people don't want to lose talented people. Yeah, and you should not aim at my path or your path. You need to find your own path. It's so cliche, but that's what the Pathless Path is all about. And to be honest, they should just read my book. It's all in there. It will be it is a powerful piece of writing designed to help people dream bigger for their lives. And often that sense of wonder is what people are missing. It's not another job. It's not becoming a solopreneur. It's figuring out how to re-inject that sense of wonder into your life. And you can do that with a job. You can do that in a solo path. And every path has its downsides.
Yeah. And I think that the total work, you said take a walk without your headphones. That's actually one of the questions for this podcast. It's one of the, why is it so hard to take a walk without headphones? And I feel this all the time. It's that this pull that like this moment needs to be productive. So instead of just soaking things in. And I think this is that total work ethos. It's like even your walk, you need to be listening to the latest, Tim Ferriss podcast where he's talking to, Derek Sivers about X, or Lex Friedman interviewing Mark Zuckerberg. You're like, you got to be on top of, the AI conversation. And I think that, there's a great book, Kiran Setia, called Midlife, which is about, he has this distinction of
I'm approaching midlife.
And yeah, exactly. Telic and telic activities. And so it's activities where there's a goal. So like, you do a great work presentation to try to get promoted. And then there's atelic activities like hiking, right? And I think what we've found is that everything we do, even we do this with friendships, where we take something atelic, which is like, I just love you as a friend. And then this little seedling in the back of our mind is like, but how can this friend advance me in this thing I care about, which again is work? So like, I see this, Arthur Brooks talks about it. He's like, there are real friends and there are deal friends. And the countless number of people I know in New York, in San Francisco, where their friendships have just been replaced by people that they do deals with, is this kind of this sneaky thing of like, take this thing that's just supposed to be so chill and beautiful and life affirming, like friendship, and then sneak in a little bit of productivity, a little bit of outcome into it. And I didn't have a point with that, but that's...
Yeah, I think this is hard to escape. I mean, even in the creator world, you notice as you get more followers, people with a lot of followers reach out to you. And it's like, oh, now I'm visible. This is weird.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that I appreciate about you. It's like, oh, Kay saw and supported my work when I had no followers. So it's like, we must have some shared threads of curiosity. But yeah, I think it's hard. I think I have this saying where it's like, on the default path, people sort by income. On the pathless path, people sort by interest. Right. I love sorting by interest because interests are infinite. If you're truly curious about them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I imagine we'll be talking when we're in our 70s about like how we can live an intentional life in our 80s.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I think that there is that. I think the thing too is I keep coming back to this idea of aliveness and this emergence of aliveness. And I think that to get to the thing, it's not about quitting or staying or more hours or less hours or remote work or not remote. It's like, are you connected to that aliveness in yourself, right? Because like, what's the opposite of aliveness is like feeling dead inside, right? And I think work is a proxy for some people for feeling dead inside, but it's not a one-for-one relationship, because I know a lot of people that leave their jobs, but they don't find that aliveness. I think that's a whole nother way of living your life and experiencing the world.
It's very scary. That's one of the people's biggest fears is, what will I do with my time? Yeah. Because I think what people are afraid of is they're not going to feel useful, and other people are not going to see them as contributors to society. Yeah. And if you're not seen as a contributor to society, people think you're a bad person. And people think this of me. People it comes through in jokes. People that I care about will say stuff to me. Be like, oh, Paul doesn't work. Paul wasted his grad degrees. And it's like, it hurts. But like, that's the other side of these things, is like, I am trying to live this sort of ridiculous path that is centered around like something that is true to something I think I can sustain and that me and my wife can sustain together. Yeah. We were at a party a couple weeks ago, and like people were talking about waiting lists for preschools, and like, Angie's like, should I be going back to work? Like, should I be working? And I'm like, am I going to lose all these friends when their kids start being in these really good schools? Like, are we crazy? Are we stupid for being on this path? And so it's a constant journey of like re-opting into my path and like trying to bet on like the values I think are important.
Yeah.
And the downside of that is if I build a life around creativity and the work that matters to me, I may live the rest of my life and no one actually sees that like no one else thinks that's actually a good life, or they think I wasted my life because like I didn't live in a good neighborhood for my kids, or like I had to move abroad to spend less.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, all those fears are with me, but I think it's worth it. I'm just like, I really think setting up your life such that you can thrive, be generous, show up as live and energized matters. But I could be wrong.
Yeah. But here's the thing too, is
my kids may like be like, I wish I had a more stable upbringing. I wish we owned a house and had a yard to play in. It's like those fears are real, and I don't know.
Yeah. I think though I can feel that, and I think that what you just said really hits at the core fear of people who stay, right, on a more prescriptive path. The other thing too though is that if you were ever to feel destitute or lost, you could opt into the path. I think that's like, I think that people, like, you are more valuable now than you were before. Like, you might not get the exact same job that you had before. I still get recruited by for like very, very high end financial services.
I don't get recruited at all anymore. But I make myself very ambiguous and not legible to the default world. I don't talk about my credentials or background anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very true. Like, I'd be so much more capable in an organization now, and I have more leverage.
Yeah.
Not because I'm more valuable, which I'm just more valuable in different ways, but I know the price of my time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if somebody's like, we want you to work 5 days a week, I'll be like, I'll work 2. They'll be like, sorry, only 5. I'd be like, okay, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's just really easy to walk away now because I know we can be happy making a very low amount of income.
Yeah. And I think it goes back, to that thing you said at the very beginning.
Test it.
I don't have many desires. Right.
Well, test it. Right.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah.
I tested living on less and I was happy.
And you're fine. Yeah. No, I love that. Oh man, so we're wrapping. I don't even know because we split the recording, but we've been riffing for a while, at least 90 minutes. Man, this is awesome. So one question I want to ask in the spirit of generosity, I'm going to ask everyone who is an up and coming creator, writer, thinker, just amazing person that should be on people's radar, and we'll promote them and highlight them. Anyone exciting for you that you want to shout out?
Michelle Vahus. She's writing under a pseudonym on Twitter. Her writing is so good. She's been on sabbatical for 2 years, really trying to figure out her path. And yeah, the raw positive energy of what she's up to is so powerful. Her writing's so good. She's going to do great things. I think she's going to write a book that's really going to inspire people. And yeah, more people should read her stuff.
Amazing. Michelle Verhoos. We'll link to her. Verhoos? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, it is MVARGHOOSE on Twitter. Awesome. Also same name .substack.com.
Awesome. How about you, Paul? Book, what socials, what do you want to promote? What do you want to share? Where can people, because you should DM him because he will respond.
I respond to everyone eventually. I didn't respond for a while with my daughter, but I just did something scary, and I think it's not that I'm not ambitious, going back to your earlier point. It's that like I just need to take a lot longer than other people to ease into things. I just did something scary and bought pathlesspath.com, which was a premium domain that cost $2,000. Yeah. And this was part of my practice of like actually trying to spend more on myself and the future and what I'm building and sort of believing in it. I was so scared to hit purchase. Pathlesspath.com. You can find links to my book and other stuff I'm up to. But yeah, that's it. I do a podcast. Kay has one or two amazing episodes on there. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Paul, for being the trial run for the first episode of the pilot. I appreciate you so much, and I'm again, in the emergence and aliveness, it's like there's nothing different that I want to be doing at this moment. So I'm grateful for you and the fact that people will get to listen to this conversation.
Same. I wish I could say the same, but my 3-month-old daughter is so cute, and like she wins over you. She wins over you for now, but this is definitely a clear number 2.
All right, I'll take silver. Thanks, Paul.